I was cleaning out the attic one Saturday afternoon when I found it. A small dusty box tucked away in the corner, hidden under an old blanket. I hadn't been up there in years, but my parents had been nagging me to help them declutter. The box looked ordinary, but something about it felt off. I opened it, and inside was a stack of old letters, a faded photograph, and a birth certificate. My heart stopped when I saw the names on the certificate. They weren't my parents' names. The date of birth was mine, but the parents listed were strangers. My hands trembled as I held the paper, my mind racing. What did this mean? Who were these people? And why had this been hidden from me? I took the box downstairs, my legs feeling like they might give out at any moment. My parents were in the living room, watching TV like it was just another normal day. I stood in the doorway, holding the birth certificate, and asked them what it was. The color drained from their faces. My mom started crying immediately, and my dad just sat there, staring at the floor. After what felt like forever, my dad finally spoke. "We were going to tell you someday," he said, his voice shaky. "We just wanted to protect you." Protect me? From what? I demanded answers, but they were vague at first. They said I was adopted, but they didn't know much about my biological parents. They claimed it was a closed adoption and the records were sealed. But I didn't believe them. There was more to this story, and I was determined to find out. That night, I couldn't sleep. My whole life felt like a lie. I spent hours online, researching how to find biological parents. I ordered a DNA test kit and sent it off the next day. While I waited for the results, I started digging through old family photos and documents. I found a letter in the box from someone named Martha. It was addressed to my parents, thanking them for taking care of me. Martha said she hoped I'd have a good life and that she'd always love me. My hands shook as I read it. Who was Martha? Was she my mother? I tried to ask my parents about her, but they shut down. "It's in the past," my mom said, tears in her eyes. "You're our daughter, and that's all that matters." But it wasn't enough for me. I needed to know the truth. The DNA results came back a few weeks later, and I was shocked by what I found. Not only did I have matches for distant relatives, but I also discovered that my biological father was someone named Robert Hayes, a name I recognized. He was a wealthy businessman who had been in the news years ago for a scandal involving embezzlement. My heart raced as I connected the dots. Was this why my parents had hidden the truth? Were they ashamed of my biological father's past? I dug deeper and found an old article about Robert Hayes. It mentioned that he had disappeared after the scandal, leaving behind a wife and a baby. The timeline matched my birth. I felt a mix of anger and confusion. Had my biological mother abandoned me too? Or had my parents taken me away from her? I confronted my parents with what I'd found. At first, they denied everything, but when I showed them the DNA results and the article, they finally broke down. My mom admitted that Martha was my biological mother, but she claimed Martha had given me up willingly. "She wasn't ready to be a mother," my mom said, crying. "We gave you a better life." But something about her tone made me doubt her. I decided to track down Martha myself. It wasn't easy, but after weeks of searching, I found her living in a small town a few hours away. When I showed up at her door, she looked at me like she'd seen a ghost. "You look just like him," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. She told me everything: how she had been in love with Robert Hayes, how he had promised to take care of her and their baby, but how he had disappeared after the scandal broke. She said my parents had offered to adopt me, but she had never wanted to give me up. She claimed they had pressured her, telling her she wasn't fit to be a mother. My heart broke as I listened to her story. All these years, I had been lied to, not just about who I was, but about who my parents were. I went back home, my mind spinning. My parents tried to act like nothing had happened, but I couldn't look at them the same way. I felt betrayed, angry, and lost. I decided to take control of my life in a way they'd never forget. I had always been the good daughter, helping them financially and emotionally, but now I saw how they had manipulated me. I gathered all the evidence: the birth certificate, the DNA results, Martha's testimony, and hired a lawyer. I threatened to expose their lies publicly unless they signed over the family business to me. They were furious, but they had no choice. They had built their lives on lies, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. When the papers were signed, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. I had finally taken back control of my life, but it had come at a cost. I moved out of their house and started a new chapter, determined to define myself on my own terms. As for Martha, I kept in touch with her. She wasn't perfect, but she was my mother. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I knew who I really was. I spent the next few months rebuilding my life, piece by piece. The family business was now mine, and I threw myself into running it, determined to prove that I could succeed without my adoptive parents' approval. It wasn't easy. There were days when the weight of everything felt overwhelming, but I refused to let their lies define me anymore. Martha and I grew closer too. She told me stories about my biological father, Robert, and while I still felt anger toward him for abandoning us, I also felt a strange connection to him through her words. She had kept a few photos of him, and I could see the resemblance between us. It was unsettling, but also comforting in a way. For the first time, I felt like I had a real sense of where I came from. Meanwhile, my adoptive parents tried to reach out to me, but I ignored their calls and messages. They sent letters begging for forgiveness, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. How could I forgive them for keeping such a huge part of my identity from me? They had controlled my life for so long, and I wasn't ready to let them back in. My mom even showed up at my office one day, tears streaming down her face, but I had security escort her out. It was harsh, but I needed space to heal. I couldn't let their guilt trips manipulate me anymore. As time went on, I started to feel stronger. I hired a therapist to help me work through everything, and slowly, I began to let go of the anger. I realized that while my adoptive parents had made terrible choices, they had also given me a stable upbringing. It didn't excuse what they had done, but it helped me see them as flawed people rather than villains. I even reached out to Martha more often, inviting her to visit me in the city. She was hesitant at first. She still felt guilty about the past, but I assured her that I didn't blame her. She had been young and scared, and she had done the best she could. We started to build a real relationship, and it felt like I was finally getting the family I had always wanted. But just when I thought things were settling down, I got a call that changed everything. It was from a lawyer representing Robert Hayes. He had passed away, and in his will, he had left me a significant inheritance. I was stunned. After all these years, he had remembered me. The lawyer explained that Robert had tried to find me years ago, but had been unable to because of the closed adoption. He had always regretted leaving, and he wanted to make amends in the only way he could. I didn't know how to feel. Anger, sadness, gratitude. It was all mixed together. I accepted the inheritance, but I also made a decision. I used part of the money to start a foundation for children who had been adopted or abandoned, helping them find their biological families if they wanted to. It felt like a way to turn my pain into something positive. In the end, I realized that family isn't just about blood or the people who raise you. It's about the connections you choose to make and the love you choose to give. My adoptive parents had hurt me deeply, but they had also given me a foundation to build on. Martha had made mistakes, but she had also given me life and was now a part of my world. And Robert, despite his flaws, had left me a legacy that allowed me to help others. I didn't have all the answers, and I knew there would always be scars, but I was finally at peace with who I was. I had taken control of my story, and for the first time, it felt like mine. As the months turned into a year, my life began to settle into a new rhythm. The foundation I started with Robert's inheritance grew faster than I had imagined. We helped dozens of people reconnect with their biological families, and the stories of reunions and healing brought me a sense of purpose I had never felt before. Martha became a regular part of my life, visiting me often and even helping out at the foundation. She had a way of connecting with people that I admired, and it was clear that she was trying to make up for lost time. We still had our awkward moments. Years of separation couldn't be erased overnight. But we were building something real, and that meant everything to me. My adoptive parents, on the other hand, were struggling. Without the family business, they had to downsize and move into a smaller home. I heard through the grapevine that they were having financial difficulties, and part of me felt guilty. But I reminded myself that they had made their choices, and I had made mine. I couldn't keep sacrificing my happiness for theirs. Still, I couldn't completely shut them out. One day, I received a letter from my mom. It was different from the others, less about guilt and more about reflection. She admitted that they had been wrong to hide the truth from me, and that they had been selfish in their actions. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She just wanted me to know that she loved me and always would. I didn't respond right away, but the letter stayed with me. It was the first time they had truly acknowledged the pain they had caused. Around the same time, I received an unexpected visitor at the foundation. It was Thomas, my adoptive brother. We had never been close. He had always been the golden child in their eyes, but he looked different now, more humble. He told me he had been doing a lot of thinking since everything had happened and that he wanted to apologize. He admitted that he had always been jealous of me, even though our parents had treated him better. He said he admired how I had taken control of my life, and that he wished he had the courage to do the same. His words surprised me, and for the first time I saw him as more than just the person who had always been favored over me. We talked for hours that day, and by the end of it, I felt like I had gained a brother for the first time in my life. With Thomas's help, I decided to reach out to my adoptive parents. It wasn't easy, and there were a lot of tears and difficult conversations, but we slowly began to rebuild our relationship. It wasn't the same as before. It couldn't be, but it was honest, and that was something we had never had. They started volunteering at the foundation, and while it was awkward at first, it gave us a chance to work together towards something positive. Martha even joined us sometimes, and while the dynamic was strange, it felt like we were all trying to move forward in our own ways. As for Robert's inheritance, I used the rest of it to expand the foundation's reach. We started offering counseling services for adoptees and birth parents, helping them navigate the emotional complexities of reunions and separations. I also set up a scholarship fund for young people who had grown up in the foster care system, giving them a chance to pursue their dreams. It felt like a way to honor Robert's memory, even though I had never known him. In a strange way, his mistakes had given me the opportunity to make a difference, and I was grateful for that. By the end of the year, I felt like a different person. The anger and betrayal that had consumed me for so long had faded, replaced by a sense of peace and purpose. I had built a life that was truly mine, surrounded by people who loved and supported me, not out of obligation, but because they wanted to. My adoptive parents, Martha, Thomas, and even the memory of Robert were all part of my story, but they didn't define me anymore. I had taken control of my narrative, and for the first time, it felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. Life continued to move forward, and with each passing day, I felt more grounded in my new reality. The foundation became a central part of my life, and I poured my heart into it. We started hosting annual events where adoptees and birth families could come together to share their stories. The first event was emotional. There were tears, laughter, and moments of profound connection. Seeing people find closure and healing reminded me why I had started this journey in the first place. Martha became a regular speaker at these events, sharing her story with raw honesty. People often came up to me afterward, telling me how much her words had touched them. It was strange to think that the woman I had once thought of as a stranger was now such an important part of my life. My relationship with my adoptive parents continued to evolve too. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension and unresolved pain, but we were trying. They had started therapy, both individually and as a couple, and it seemed to be helping them come to terms with their past mistakes. My mom even apologized to Martha during one of the foundation's events, which was a huge step for her. It was awkward and emotional, but it felt like a turning point. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could all find a way to move forward together. Thomas and I grew closer as well. He had taken a step back from the family business and started his own venture, something completely separate from our parents' expectations. He told me it was the first time he had ever felt truly free. We started meeting for coffee every week, and those conversations became something I looked forward to. He was no longer the golden child in my eyes, and I was no longer the burden in his. We were just two people trying to figure out life, and that felt like enough. As for Martha, she became more than just my biological mother. She became a friend. We spent weekends together exploring the city and sharing stories about our lives. She had a sharp sense of humor and a way of seeing the world that I admired. One day she told me she was proud of me, not just for what I had accomplished with the foundation, but for the person I had become. Her words meant more to me than I could express. For so long I had felt like I didn't belong anywhere, but now I had a family that was messy, complicated, and real. The foundation's work continued to grow, and we started receiving national attention. I was invited to speak at conferences and even appeared on a few talk shows to share my story. It was surreal to think that something born out of so much pain could have such a positive impact. I met other adoptees who had gone through similar experiences, and their stories inspired me to keep pushing forward. I realized that I wasn't alone in my journey, and that realization gave me strength. One evening, as I was closing up the foundation's office, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. It had been a long and difficult road, but I had come out on the other side stronger and more resilient. I had faced betrayal, loss, and heartache, but I had also found love, forgiveness, and purpose. My adoptive parents, Martha, Thomas, and even Robert, they were all part of my story, but they didn't define me. I had taken control of my life, and in doing so, I had created something beautiful out of the chaos. As I locked the door and walked to my car, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't known was possible. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer held me back. I had built a life that was mine, filled with people who loved and supported me. And for the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. I had found my truth, and in doing so, I had found myself. The years continued to roll by, and the foundation became a cornerstone of my life. It wasn't just a project anymore, it was a legacy. We expanded our services, offering support groups, legal aid, and even DNA testing for those who wanted to find their biological families. The stories of reunions and healing never failed to move me, and I felt a deep sense of pride in what we had built. Martha became a beloved figure in the community, her honesty and warmth touching everyone she met. She often joked that she had gone from being a stranger to me to being the face of the foundation, and I couldn't help but laugh. It was amazing to see how far we had come. My adoptive parents continued to be involved too, though in a more limited capacity. They had moved to a smaller town, seeking a quieter life, but they still visited occasionally to help with events or just to spend time with me. Our relationship was different now, less about obligation and more about choice. We had all made mistakes, but we were trying to do better, and that was enough. My mom once told me that she admired the person I had become, and while it didn't erase the past, it meant a lot to hear. I realized that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about moving forward. Thomas's new business was thriving, and he had become a different person because of it. He was happier, more confident, and less burdened by the weight of our parents' expectations. We still met for coffee every week, and those conversations had become a highlight of my routine. He had started dating someone, and for the first time, I saw him truly in love. It was a side of him I had never seen before, and it made me happy to know he had found his own path. Martha and I grew even closer too. She had moved to the city to be nearer to me, and we spent most weekends together. She had a way of making me laugh even on my hardest days, and I cherished the bond we had built. One day she surprised me with a photo album she had put together, a collection of pictures from her life, including a few of Robert. It was strange to see him in those photos, knowing he was my father, but also knowing I would never truly know him. Martha told me stories about him, some good and some bad, and I appreciated her honesty. She never tried to paint him as a hero or a villain, just as a flawed human being who had made mistakes. It helped me see him in a different light, and I felt a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. The foundation's success brought new opportunities, and I found myself traveling more often to speak at events and conferences. It was exhausting at times, but also incredibly rewarding. I met people from all walks of life, each with their own story of loss, love, and resilience. Those connections reminded me why I had started this journey in the first place. It wasn't just about my story anymore, it was about helping others find their own truth. One evening, after a particularly long day, I found myself sitting in my office, surrounded by photos and mementos from the Foundation's events. There was a picture of Martha and me at our first reunion event, another of my adoptive parents volunteering at a fundraiser, and even one of Thomas and me laughing over coffee. As I looked at those photos, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. My life had been shaped by so many people, some who had hurt me, others who had healed me, and all who had taught me something about love, forgiveness, and resilience. I realized then that family isn't just about blood or the people who raise you. It's about the connections you choose to nurture and the love you choose to give. My adoptive parents, Martha, Thomas, and even Robert, they were all part of my story, but they didn't define me. I had taken control of my life, and in doing so, I had created something beautiful out of the chaos. As I turned off the lights and left the office that night, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't known was possible. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer held me back. I had built a life that was mine, filled with people who loved and supported me. And for the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. I had found my truth, and in doing so, I had found myself. Years turned into a decade, and the Foundation became a beacon of hope for countless people. It was no longer just my story. It was a movement, a community of individuals who had found strength in their shared experiences. Martha continued to be a pillar of the Foundation, her presence a constant reminder of the power of second chances. She had become like a second mother to many of the people we helped, and I couldn't have been prouder of her. She often joked that she had gone from being a stranger in the shadows to a grandma figure in the Foundation, and I would laugh, knowing how far we had both come. My adoptive parents, now in their late 70s, had settled into a quieter life. They visited occasionally, and while our relationship was never the same as it had been before the truth came out, it was honest and real. We had all made peace with the past, and that was enough. My mom once told me that she admired the life I had built, and while it didn't erase the pain of their lies, it meant a lot to hear. I realized that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about choosing to move forward even when the scars remained. Thomas had married the woman he had been dating, and they had 2 beautiful children. He had become the kind of father he had always wanted to be, present, loving, and free from the weight of our parents' expectations. We still met for coffee whenever we could, and those conversations remained a cherished part of my life. He had found his own path, and it was inspiring to see him so happy. As for me, I had found a sense of fulfillment I had never imagined possible. The Foundation had grown beyond my wildest dreams, and I had built a life that was truly my own. I had even started writing a book about my journey, hoping to inspire others who felt lost or betrayed. It was cathartic to put my story into words, and I hoped it would help others find their own truth. One evening, as I was preparing for the Foundation's annual reunion event, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. The event was always emotional, but this year felt different. Martha had asked to speak, and I knew it would be a powerful moment. When she took the stage, the room fell silent. She spoke about her regrets, her love for me, and the joy she had found in being part of my life. Her words were raw and honest, and there wasn't a dry eye in the room. When she finished, she looked at me and said, "You gave me a second chance, and I'll always be grateful for that." I felt tears stream down my face as I hugged her, knowing how far we had both come. After the event, I stood outside, looking up at the stars. The night was quiet, and I felt a deep sense of peace. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Thomas, thanking me for everything. I smiled, thinking about how much we had all grown. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. I had faced betrayal, loss, and heartache, but I had also found love, forgiveness, and purpose. As I walked back inside, I felt a sense of gratitude for the life I had built. My adoptive parents, Martha, Thomas, and even Robert. They were all part of my story, but they didn't define me. I had taken control of my life, and in doing so, I had created something beautiful out of the chaos. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer held me back. I had found my truth, and in doing so, I had found myself. And for the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be.